material chronologizes the century-long evolution of air travel between the UK and Australia, culminating in the upcoming 22-hour direct flights under Project Sunrise.
Right.
It is a strong, highly detailed historical piece, but let's dive right into how we can elevate it further. The historical chronology effectively demonstrates the progression of aviation, but the granular listing of intermediate stops severely bogs down the narrative momentum.
Yeah, I absolutely want to dig into that right away because the weakness here becomes, glaringly apparent when we hit those detailed sections. The ones chronicling the 1919, 1935, and post-war routes.
Right, those early days of flight.
Exactly. I mean, the material meticulously catalogs over 24 specific layover cities. The reader is just marched through Akyab, Rangoon, Bangkok, Aloristar, Singapore, Jakarta, Surabaya, Rambang, Kopang, and Darwin.
It's a lot to take in.
It is a lot. By documenting every single geographic coordinate, the text turns a genuinely fascinating historical progression into what feels like, well, a tedious geographical roll call.
Oh, for sure.
And this exhaustive list fatigue risks causing the reader to completely tune out. Worse than that, it dilutes the emotional weight of just how arduous these early journeys truly were.
I can see what you're going for here. Let's see how we can strengthen this. But I have to push back slightly on the premise that listing the cities is inherently bad. I mean, isn't the vast geographical scale the entire point of the essay?
Well, yes, but...
Right. So if we cut out the intermediate stops, don't we lose the sheer magnitude of the distance being covered? The author has clearly done a massive amount of research to map this out.
They have, and that is, it's a classic trap writers fall into. Basically, the researcher's curse.
Oh, man. The researcher's curse is so real.
It really is. You spend hours digging through archives to find the exact route of a 1935 short Empire flying boat, and you feel obligated to put every single stop on the page to validate the effort.
Right. You want to show your work.
Exactly. But writing out a list of cities doesn't actually convey distance to the human brain. It just conveys data. When a reader sees a block of 20 exotic city names separated by commas, their eyes naturally glaze over. They start skimming.
Yeah, they just skip ahead to the next paragraph.
Right. So the suggestion to fix this is to condense the exhausting itineraries by focusing heavily on the sensory extremes, the physical toll, and the most jarring logistical hurdles of the trip, rather than providing a literal spreadsheet of stops.
Makes total sense.
We want the reader to feel the brutal reality of the journey in their bones, not just track it on a two-dimensional map.
So, a key theme running through this material seems to be the sheer physical endurance required by early travelers. I mean, we are talking about 12.5 days of travel in 1935 just to get from London to Brisbane.
Right, that is a marathon.
But reading the section as it is currently written feels less like an epic historical struggle and more like listening to someone recount every single gas station they visited on a cross-country road trip.
That is a great analogy.
Like, the audience knows a trip from New York to Los Angeles is long. They don't need the zip code of every rest stop to prove it. The challenge is maintaining the epic scale of this 14,000-kilometer journey without paralyzing the audience with raw geography.
That is the exact challenge. And the solution lies in targeting the passenger's actual physical experience. Let's look at some concrete examples of how to rewrite this.
Yeah, let's hear them.
So take that 1935 route. Instead of naming all 28 stops between Paris and Brisbane, the author could highlight the sheer logistical absurdity of the ordeal. Put the reader in the shoes of a wealthy 1930s passenger.
Right, someone who has just paid the modern equivalent of $50,000 for a ticket.
Exactly.
Tell us about the jarring experience of being forced off a relatively comfortable plane in Paris, only to be dragged onto a noisy overnight train down to Brindisi, Italy.
Just because the aviation treaties of the time prohibited flying over certain airspaces.
Right. I mean, that is fascinating.
It really is. And that immediately changes the texture of the writing. Instead of a map, it's a lived experience.
Precisely.
You can then focus on the stark sensory contrasts. Describe what it feels like to step out of a vibrating, deafening metal fuselage after 10 hours of low-altitude turbulence.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Just feeling that in your teeth?
And then stepping straight into the sweltering, oppressive humidity of an Alexandria night. Focus on the smell of hot engine oil mingling with the desert air, or the chronic sleep deprivation of changing time zones at a crawling pace.
Right. You really want them to feel that exhaustion.
Yeah, If the author focuses on the sheer physical exhaustion and the sensory whiplash that a passenger would endure, they truly convey why bringing the trip down from 12 days to a modern 22-hour continuous flight is such a monumental miracle of engineering.
Okay, so what I really like about this part is how we can use the environment to dictate the pacing. The text doesn't just describe a slow journey. The text itself slows down to let you feel the heat and the exhaustion.
That makes sense. But could the evidence also support a different conclusion? Like leaning into the sheer danger of the earlier flights to make the pacing more dynamic rather than just focusing on exhaustion?
Oh, interesting point.
Yeah. Let's consider the 1943 double sunrise service the author mentions. The material notes that they flew consolidated PBY Catalinas across the Indian Ocean.
Right, those old military flying boats?
Yes, and they flew in total radio silence. They navigated entirely by the stars to avoid Japanese-occupied territory. I mean, that is inherently thrilling.
It's basically an action movie at that point.
But again, the narrative momentum stalls out because the text reverts to listing the departure point in Western Australia and the arrival point in Ceylon. To keep the momentum driving forward, the author needs to keep us inside that unpressurized freezing cabin.
Yeah, we need to feel the tension of a 33-hour continuous flight over hostile waters.
Exactly, where passengers literally watch the sunrise twice. That type of sensory, tension-driven storytelling does so much more heavy lifting than a list of coordinates ever could.
That paints a much more vivid picture. And once we streamline that brutal, exhausting history of getting from point A to point B, the material naturally transitions out of the past.
Right, we move forward.
We finally leave those unpressurized cabins and arrive at the modern era, specifically the upcoming 22-hour direct flights. The narrative rightfully celebrates the technological triumph of a 22-hour nonstop flight, yet it completely overlooks the complex environmental and psychological implications of ultra-long-haul travel in the modern era.
Yeah, the focus purely on the reduction of travel time leaves a massive analytical void in the final act of this piece. The author treats the achievement as an absolute, unmitigated victory.
Which, it is a huge victory for engineering.
It is, but modern audiences are naturally analytical. They are inherently skeptical of consequence-free technology. When the material introduces Airbus A350 aircraft that have been specifically modified to carry 20,000 extra liters of fuel,
That's just so much fuel.
it is a massive amount. And while simultaneously reducing passenger capacity from over 300 down to just 238 people, strictly to save on weight, well, it raises some serious questions.
Oh, I see what you mean. The math is kind of crazy there.
Right, portraying this exclusively as one of the most incredible achievements of the modern era feels slightly tone-deaf and incomplete. It reads like an airline press release rather than a critical historical analysis.
I hear that criticism, but I want to defend the author's intent for a moment. The material makes a strong case for the technological leap by highlighting the raw engineering required to fly 17,000 kilometers nonstop.
Sure, the engineering is impressive.
We are talking about pushing the absolute physical limits of aerodynamics and materials science. Why bog down a triumphant story of human achievement with a heavy-handed lecture on modern socioeconomic or environmental issues?
That's fascinating. What are the potential limitations or counterarguments to that idea? Because I would argue that acknowledging the cost of an achievement doesn't diminish the engineering marvel, it actually grounds it in reality.
Okay, I'm listening.
Ignoring the cost creates a blind spot that risks alienating a thoughtful reader. The suggestion here is to expand the conclusion to address the complex realities and trade-offs of Project Sunrise. Needs to add a layer of balanced critical analysis to the celebratory tone.
I can see how adding that friction might make the ending feel more earned. Let's look closely at the section discussing the physics of the flight to find some concrete examples for the author to use.
Yeah, let's break that down.
They need to briefly acknowledge the environmental elephant in the room regarding the carbon footprint per passenger on an ultra-long-haul route. When you modify a plane to fly for 22 hours, you run into the rocket equation problem.
Oh, right, the rocket equation.
You are fundamentally carrying thousands of pounds of extra fuel just to have the aerodynamic power to lift that extra fuel over the first 10 hours of the flight.
It's kinda wild to think about it that way.
It is. Exploring that physical reality, the sheer energy expenditure required to save a few hours of travel time, adds profound weight to the analysis. It shows the reader how this miracle is achieved, not just that it exists.
Building on that point, What if we looked at it from the perspective of the passenger experience itself? Because beyond the environmental cost, there is a profound psychological shift happening here.
What kind of shift?
Well, the author mentions that Qantas is installing bespoke well-being zones on these specific A350s, so passengers can stand, stretch, and get a drink during the 22 continuous hours in the air.
Right, I remember reading about those zones.
We can contrast that highly engineered, sterile well-being zone with the extreme physical isolation of 18th century Australia, which took up to a year to reach by sail.
Oh wow, that is quite the contrast.
Right? There is an incredibly rich psychological theme sitting right beneath the surface about the reality of having zero geographic isolation left on Earth.
The concept of zero geographic isolation is brilliant. It makes the world feel incredibly small, almost claustrophobically so.
Is the connection between saving 3 hours of layover time in Singapore and the physical confinement of a 22-hour continuous flight fully established in the material, or is that an area to potentially bolster?
It definitely needs bolstering. As I understand it from the notes, the author simply states that current one-stop flights through Singapore take about 25 hours.
Right.
And that gives passengers a chance to get off the plane for 2 hours to walk around a terminal. Project Sunrise cuts the total travel time down to 22 hours, but the trade-off is that you are trapped in a sealed metal tube for the entirety of that time.
Exactly. You can't just step outside for fresh air.
So the question is saving 3 hours of total transit truly worth that continuous, unbroken physical confinement? Presenting that question directly to the reader doesn't ruin the celebration of the technology. It humanizes it.
I completely agree.
It asks the reader to critically consider what we are actually gaining and what we are giving up in the relentless pursuit of a completely borderless, frictionless world.
A completely borderless, frictionless world. I mean, that is such a powerful thematic concept. It leaves the reader contemplating the gravity of human progress.
It really does.
And critically, it is the exact concept the author attempts to use to wrap up the piece and pivot to their sponsor.
Which leads us directly into the structural mechanics of that ending. The abrupt pivot from the triumph of global aviation to a sponsor read about data privacy creates a jarring tonal whiplash that shatters the immersion of the piece.
Yeah, the weakness here is deeply structural, and it entirely breaks the spell the author has spent thousands of words casting. The transition immediately jumps from a grand, sweeping philosophical statement about the collective pride of humanity in conquering the final frontiers of the globe,
Straight into an ad.
straight into a highly localized, transactional complaint about weak data privacy laws in the United States and the dangers of people search sites. There is absolutely no thematic bridge.
None at all. It just drops right in.
This sudden drop from high-minded historical aviation to a pitch for incogni completely undercuts the authority and the emotional climax the author just built.
I have to play devil's advocate here. Writers and creators integrate sponsor reads into their content all the time. The audience understands the content has to be funded somehow.
That is true. They expect it.
So, is there truly a risk that forcing a sponsor read aggressively into the text actually causes the audience to resent the sponsor? Or are we holding this historical essay to an impossibly high ad-free standard?
I think there is a massive risk of resentment, and it comes down to the psychology of the reader's state of flow.
Okay, tell me more about that.
When someone is deeply immersed in a narrative, especially a sensory historical narrative where they are picturing flying boats over the Indian Ocean or contemplating the psychological weight of a 22-hour flight, their brain is in a receptive, imaginative state.
Right, they are fully bought in.
Yes, so when you abruptly yank them out of that state with a jarring commercial break that has no connective tissue to what they were just imagining, it feels manipulative.
I can see how that would pull you right out of the story.
The immediate reaction is to skip the ad entirely. But worse, the cognitive friction creates a negative association with the brand being pitched.
Oh, interesting.
So the suggestion to resolve this is to weave the sponsor's core value proposition, which in this case is privacy and protection, directly into the thematic fabric of the aviation story.
That makes total sense.
This creates a seamless, clever, and engaging transition that respects the reader's intelligence and maintains that state of flow.
I love the idea of maintaining the state of flow, but practically speaking, how does an author execute that? Finishing this epic historical essay with an unrelated ad for a data broker removal service feels like ending a grand symphony with a loud car horn in the front row.
Yeah, it really does.
It completely shatters the emotional climax. How do we turn that car horn into the final note of the symphony?
Well, we need concrete examples of how to build that thematic bridge. The author needs to connect the concept of the shrinking of the physical globe directly to the shrinking of digital borders.
Okay, I'm following.
For instance, they could write a transition noting that just as Project Sunrise proves that no physical location on Earth is isolated anymore, the modern internet has ensured that no individual is digitally isolated either.
Oh, that's clever.
Right? We are all globally connected. That connectivity is a miracle of modern technology, just like the A350, but it also comes with a massive trade-off. Our personal data is out in the open, exposed to the elements, and constantly tracked.
That is an incredibly smooth pivot. You take the core theme of the essay, the relentless march of global connectivity, and apply it directly to the problem the sponsor solves.
Exactly. It feels like a continuation.
We could even take that a step further and tie it back to the aircraft itself. The author could frame the sponsor, Incogni, as the digital equivalent of Qantas's well-being zone.
That's clearly laid out. I wonder, though, if we've considered how far we can push that analogy without it feeling forced.
I think if it's done subtly, it works perfectly. The author has already established that the airline offers a protected, comfortable space for passengers who are navigating a world where physical boundaries have entirely collapsed.
Right.
The transition simply points out that Incognito offers a protected, private space in a world where digital boundaries have collapsed. It removes your personal data from broker lists, giving you a sanctuary of privacy in a completely borderless digital world.
That solves the tonal whiplash completely. It transforms the advertisement from a jarring, transactional commercial break into a natural continuation of the essay's core philosophy.
Exactly. It keeps them hooked.
The reader stays engaged and actually consumes the sponsor read because the intellectual thread hasn't been broken. It has merely evolved to apply to their own daily life.
As I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that the sponsor read shouldn't feel like an interruption. It should function as an epilogue.
I really like that framing. An epilogue.
If the author uses the historical narrative to set up the modern problem of overconnectivity and lack of isolation, the sponsor naturally positions itself as the necessary solution to that exact problem.
Right.
It's a win for the narrative structure, a win for the reader's experience, and a win for the sponsor's conversion rates.
Absolutely. It honors the research the author put into the history while treating the monetization of the piece as a creative writing challenge rather than just a copy and paste obligation.
All right, let's pull all of this together and concisely summarize the actionable takeaways from today's critique. First, swap the geographical list-making for sensory storytelling. Condense those exhausting 28-stop itineraries.
Right. No one wants to read a map.
Exactly. Instead of mapping the route, focus on the physical toll, the jarring logistical hurdles, and the sheer danger of early aviation to maintain a gripping narrative pace.
Yes.
Second, deepen the modern implications by addressing the complex trade-offs of ultra-long-haul flights. Don't just act as a cheerleader for the 22-hour flight. Critically analyze the physics of the carbon costs and the psychological reality of zero geographic isolation to give the piece analytical weight.
Bring in that friction.
Yep. And third, thematically bridge the concept of a borderless physical world to the need for digital privacy. Use the shrinking of the globe as a direct metaphor for the shrinking of digital borders to create a smooth, resonant, and intellectually engaging transition into the sponsor read.
We highly encourage you to take these structural, thematic, and pacing suggestions, apply them to the draft, and submit your revised work back to us for another round of feedback. We would love to see how this piece evolves once these deeper layers are unlocked.
Because ultimately, you don't want your audience feeling like they are enduring a 28-stop cross-country road trip forced to memorize every single geographic coordinate along the way.
Definitely not.
You want them to feel the turbulence, marvel at the engineering, critically examine the cost of progress, and arrive at the end of the piece deeply changed by the journey.